You ever see somebody panicking before they even realize they're panicking? Baby, that's exactly what I witnessed happen right there under those bright studio lights with the cameras rolling, the mics hot, and millions of people watching. Donald Trump was on my left, Ivanka was on my right, producers were whispering, camera operators shifting, and that little red light on the lens was glowing like a heartbeat. And the very second I opened my mouth and said what I said, everything in their faces changed. I'm talking about a shift so sudden it felt like somebody cracked the air between us. Trump's jaw locked first, not the usual tough guy jaw he puts on when he's trying to look powerful. No, this was different. This was small, tight, the kind of clench a man does when he hears something he hoped would never be spoken out loud. Ivanka, her reaction was even sharper. Her eyes flicked. Not to me, not to her father, but straight toward the nearest producer, like she was silently asking, are they going to cut the feed? Her shoulders dropped half an inch, her breath hitched, and for one split second, she looked like a woman who'd just seen a ghost walk through the door. And baby, I recognized that look instantly. I've seen it on the faces of politicians right before a truth hits them harder than any scandal ever could, a truth they've spent years trying to outrun. Now, before I tell you what I actually said, because trust me, we are going to walk through that moment slow and clear, I want to ask something personal. Which country are you watching me from tonight? Are you joining me from the US, the UK, Canada, somewhere else? Tell me in the comments. I ask because this conversation we're having, this community we're building, it matters. It tells me who's out there looking for the real truth behind all the noise. And while you're down there, go ahead and tap, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because baby, the way Donald and Ivanka panicked when I spoke, that wasn't about politics. That wasn't about a headline. That wasn't about some campaign spin. That was fear. Old fear, family fear. And the thing I said on live TV, the thing that made them both freeze, didn't come out of nowhere. There was a whole week of tension leading up to that moment. A week where every smile felt forced, every move felt rehearsed, and every Trump in that building looked like they were bracing for impact. So let's rewind this tape, because to understand the shock, you've got to understand what they were afraid of before I ever opened my mouth. People don't panic in a moment unless something has been eating at them long before the moment arrives. So if we're going to talk honestly tonight, we've got to rewind the clock. Not hours, not days, but a full heavy week where the temperature inside every Trump room kept rising and rising and rising. Let me take you back. The network had invited all three of us, Trump, Ivanka, and me, for what they called a straightforward conversation. Child, please. Nothing with that family is straightforward. Before I even stepped into the building, my phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Producers whispering, Jasmine, Ivanka hasn't confirmed her seating. Jasmine, the former president's team wants a list of your talking points. Jasmine, can we send security to escort you in? Baby, I've done enough high-pressure interviews to know when a storm is building, but this one felt different, heavier, tighter, like everybody knew something they weren't saying out loud. 2 days before the show, a staffer, someone I'd known for years, pulled me aside and said quietly, just be ready. There's tension between them right now. Not tension between campaigns, not tension between aides, tension between Trump and Ivanka. That's when I knew this wasn't a normal broadcast. This was a fault line waiting for the right weight to make it crack. And the strangest part, I've experienced this energy before. Not in DC, not in a courtroom, but as a 16-year-old girl sitting in the hallway outside my high school principal's office. Back then, 2 parents were inside arguing over a truth their daughter finally told. I remember hearing muffled voices, then silence, then a deep breath that didn't sound like anger. It sounded like fear. And baby, when I walked into that TV studio that week, I felt that exact same energy sitting between Donald and Ivanka like a third person in the room. Ivanka wasn't making eye contact with staff. She was polite, painfully polite, the kind of polite people become when they're trying not to show how tense they are. Trump was snapping at aides over tiny details that never mattered before. His tie, the lighting, the order of the questions, all of it suddenly urgent. Everybody around them kept saying the same thing with their eyes, but not their mouths. Something happened. Don't ask what. By the time we walked toward that stage, I already knew that whatever I said on live TV would land on a crack that had been forming all week. And baby, cracks that deep don't just split, they explode. Which brings us to Ivanka, because her behavior before the camera even turned on told me exactly where the real tension lived. You ever watch somebody move around a room like they're trying not to be seen, even when the whole world already sees them? That was Ivanka before the cameras rolled. And baby, I've been in politics long enough to know the difference between a woman who's simply nervous and a woman who's bracing for something she can't control. The moment she walked into the studio, I sensed it. She didn't float in like she usually does, that polished, measured glide she's perfected after years of photo ops and staged handshakes. No, this time her steps were short, careful, almost hesitant, like she was trying to keep her mind from slipping out of the mask she was wearing. I watched her from across the room, and she kept doing something I found quite interesting. She'd check her phone, lock it, then check it again, like she was waiting to see if someone texted her or maybe hoping someone wouldn't. Her eyes didn't move the way they normally do either. They were scanning the room, not for cameras, not for flattering angles, but for exits. Let me tell you something personal. Back when I was practicing law in Dallas, I had a client, a mother, who used to pace like that before every hearing involving her ex-husband. She never told me the full story. She never had to. Her body told the truth. She was afraid of something coming out, something she had managed quietly for years, something she didn't want, spoken out loud. Watching Ivanka that day brought that woman right back into my mind. Ivanka kept touching her necklace too, a tiny little gesture. Women do that when they're grounding themselves, getting steady. And every time she looked in Trump's direction, her shoulders tightened just a little, like she was preparing for whatever mood he was in that morning. I've seen daughters do that with fathers who demand loyalty more than love. It's a tension you don't forget once you've witnessed it. At one point, a producer asked her, "Are you comfortable with your seat?" And Ivanka answered in this thin, careful voice, "Wherever you place me is fine. Not I'd prefer this angle. Not could we adjust the lighting." No notes, no requests, just a woman trying not to draw attention to herself. And baby, when Ivanka Trump stops trying to control the room, something is very, very off. She flicked her eyes toward me only once before the show started. Just once. And the expression she had, it wasn't annoyance and it wasn't confidence. It was a quiet, tired kind of dread. The kind of look someone gives when they're thinking, "Please don't say the thing I know," you might say. And that told me everything I needed to know. Ivanka already knew the truth I was carrying with me. She didn't know if I'd say it, but she knew I could. What she didn't know was that I had observed her father that whole week too, and he was hiding something even deeper than she was. Now, let's talk about Donald for a minute, because baby, the energy coming off that man before the cameras rolled was something I've only seen a few times in my entire career. And trust me, I've been around powerful men who thought the world spun because they told it to. But this was different. Trump wasn't pacing. He never paces. He stands like a man who expects the room to orbit around him. But that day he kept shifting his weight, tapping one foot then the other, like the ground underneath him wasn't as solid as he needed it to be. That tells you everything right there. When a man who built his image on dominance starts fidgeting, he's not in control of the moment. He kept snapping at his team too. Not full-on yelling, more of those sharp, irritated whispers that cut harder than shouting. He didn't like the lighting. He didn't like the temperature. He didn't like that the moderator wasn't warm enough, whatever that meant. It was all these tiny demands over nothing. And I recognized that behavior instantly. Back in my 20s, long before politics, before law school, I worked part-time at a community center where this local pastor used to come in for planning meetings. Big personality, booming voice. Everybody knew him. And every time the church board was about to challenge him on something, he'd get real particular. Suddenly, the chairs weren't aligned. The AC was too cold. The coffee was bitter. Baby, he'd start controlling the smallest things because the big thing was slipping away from him. That's exactly what Trump looked like in that studio, a man trying to grip something that was getting away from him inch by inch. But the part that hit me the hardest was when he tried to rehearse his lines under his breath. Donald Trump doesn't rehearse. He improvises, he performs, he blusters, he fills space like a man who's never doubted a word coming out of his mouth. But that day, he kept glancing down at note cards, actual note cards, flipping them, reading them, then stuffing them back into his jacket like he was ashamed he needed them. And every few minutes, he'd look over at Ivanka, not for comfort. You don't look to your daughter for comfort when you're in panic mode. No. He looked at her like he needed to be sure she was steady enough to stand beside him once the question started. But Ivanka wasn't steady. She was a statue with a heartbeat. Then he looked at me and baby. That look wasn't anger. I've seen his anger before. This wasn't it. This look was something closer to fear. The kind of fear you get when you know somebody in the room sees straight through you. He adjusted his tie 3 times. He asked an aide about the segment order twice. He muttered something Ivanka pretended not to hear. Everything about him said one thing. Don't let her go off script. Don't let her say it. But here's the secret he never learned. When you spend years stacking lies like bricks, the smallest truth becomes a wrecking ball. And what I didn't know yet was that the truth sitting on the tip of my tongue was the exact truth he'd spent the whole week trying to keep away from that camera. You know how you can walk into a room and feel the subject, everybody's dancing around, even before a single word is spoken. That's what this whole week felt like. Every hallway, every whisper, every staffer with their eyes a little too wide, it all pointed toward one thing nobody wanted to name. And baby, let me tell you something. I've learned after years in courtrooms, committee hearings, and late night negotiation rooms. The thing people are most desperate to avoid is always the thing that needs to be said the most. The tension between Trump and Ivanka wasn't about politics. It wasn't about donors. It wasn't about polling. This wasn't campaign season stress. This was personal, close to the bone personal, a kind of weight that makes people look older overnight. And here's the part that stuck with me. Every time someone mentioned a certain situation, a decision, a meeting, a disagreement they'd had, the room got quieter. Staffers exchanged these tiny glances, the kind people give when they all know something but aren't allowed to acknowledge it. And I kept thinking, okay, so this is the topic. This is the landmine, but nobody would say the word. It reminded me of something from my early activist days. I was volunteering with this community group, helping families navigate conflicts. There was one family, sweet folks really, who were falling apart over a decision the daughter made that her father didn't agree with. And every time that decision came up, even indirectly, the father's shoulders would tense and the daughter's eyes would drop. They'd never say what happened. They'd never admit the hurt, but the pain didn't need words. It filled the room all by itself. Trump and Ivanka had that same heaviness around them. Not rage, not coldness, just this unspoken tension tied to a moment between them that neither of them had processed. A moment Ivanka regretted, a moment Donald resented, a moment they were hoping the world had forgotten. And here's the strangest part. Nobody told me this truth. I didn't need them to. I've been around families long enough to sense a wound when it walks past me. And every time Ivanka shifted in her chair, every time Donald cut off a question before it landed, every time an aide suddenly pretended to check their email, it all led back to the same emotional bruise. This was the subject I knew they didn't want exposed. This was the truth sitting between them like a shadow. This was the thing they'd spent all week trying to protect. And when the lights came up and that red camera light turned on and the moderators opened the floor to me, baby, I didn't plan to say it, but sometimes the truth doesn't ask permission. It just comes out. When that studio light blinked red and the floor manager whispered, "We're live," the whole room shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was that tiny pause, that split-second inhale where everyone knows the truth is about to walk into the room, whether they're ready for it or not. I could feel the heat of the lights on my face, but the air between the three of us felt cold, tight, like a string pulled too far. Trump sat with his chest puffed out, trying to bring back that old posture of certainty he used to wear, like armor. Ivanka sat still as marble, hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed forward but unfocused. The look of someone bracing for an impact nobody else could see. And then the moderator turned to me. "Congresswoman Crockett, what's your perspective?" Just that, a simple question. But baby, the truth underneath it was not simple at all. I didn't rush my answer. I didn't lean forward. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke. And this is what I said. Why? Word for word. I think the American people deserve to know the truth behind the tension we're seeing, especially when it comes from a disagreement between a father and daughter who once worked side by side. That was it. That one sentence. Nothing wild, nothing explosive. But baby, the moment it left my mouth, something happened. Donald's head snapped toward me so fast the camera almost missed it. His eyes narrowed like he was trying to decide whether to challenge me, interrupt me, or pretend he hadn't heard what I said. Ivanka froze. Not the poised freeze she does for photos. The real freeze. The freeze of someone whose heart just skipped a beat. And the funny thing, I wasn't even finished. Because once the words started coming out, something inside me, something old and instinctive took over. Maybe it was the years I've spent watching powerful people dodge accountability. Maybe it was the little girl in me who watched truth get silenced too many times in rooms where men held the microphones. Or maybe it was because I saw Ivanka flinch. Just barely, but enough for me to know I had touched the nerve they were trying so hard to hide. So I kept going. People can disagree privately, but when those disagreements shape public decisions, and when someone as central as Ivanka steps back, the country deserves clarity. Ivanka's breath caught in her throat. Trump leaned forward, lips pressed into a thin white line. And let me tell you something. Cameras might show you what happened, but they will never show you what it felt like in that moment. The air got heavy. The crew stopped moving. Even the moderator went silent for a beat too long. The kind of silence that tells you everyone suddenly realized the conversation had taken a turn nobody prepared for. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I wasn't trying to insult them. I wasn't even trying to make a headline. I was simply telling the truth. a truth they had avoided so carefully that even hearing it spoken aloud made something inside both of them crack. And baby, what happened in the next few seconds showed me just how deep that crack already was. The moment those words left my mouth, the whole studio changed. I'm talking about the kind of shift you feel more than here, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees and every molecule of air froze in place, waiting to see what would happen next. Trump reacted first. He didn't lash out. He didn't bark at me. He didn't even interrupt, which, baby, you know is not his nature. He did something far more revealing. He blinked slow like a man processing a hit he didn't see coming. Then his fingers curled around the edge of the table, gripping it just enough for the wood to creak. The cameras didn't pick that up, but I heard it. I was sitting close enough to feel the tension ripple off of him. It was the sound of a man trying to hold something inside. Ivanka's reaction came right after, but hers was quieter and in a way much sadder. Her chin lowered by the tiniest fraction, barely noticeable unless you were looking right at her. Her shoulders pulled in like she was trying to make herself smaller, like she wished she could disappear into the fabric of her seat. And her hands folded so neatly a moment before and suddenly tightened, her fingers squeezing together until her knuckles turned pale. I've seen that posture before, not in Congress, not in courtrooms, in real life. Years ago, I worked with a teen girl whose father kept pressuring her to take on a role in the family business she didn't want. Every time he spoke about her future, she'd shrink in the exact same way, shoulders curling, hands squeezing, eyes lowering, the posture of someone trapped between love and self-preservation. The producers didn't know what to do. One of them actually took a step toward the stage, then stopped mid-step, like even they didn't want to get too close to what was happening. The moderator glanced around the room with this nervous half smile, like she was waiting for someone else to break the silence first. Even the audience, who normally laughs, reacts, claps, went still. It was like the entire room collectively inhaled and forgot how to let the breath out. And in that quiet, something else happened. Trump turned slightly toward Ivanka, not fully, not dramatically, just enough for me to see the flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not frustration, but something that looked a whole lot like hurt. And Ivanka didn't look back. She kept her eyes down, her jaw trembling just barely, her whole body saying the things she didn't dare say aloud. I can't do this anymore. That's when I knew the truth I had spoken. The truth they tried to bury wasn't just about politics. It was about a relationship, a fracture, a wound between a father and daughter that nobody had the courage to acknowledge, not until that moment. And baby, as heavy as that moment was, the real question, then the one that explains everything, is why that truth hit them so hard in the first place. Let me tell you something that years in politics have taught me. People don't panic over a lie. They panic over a truth they've spent too long avoiding. And baby, that moment on live TV when Donald stiffened and Ivanka folded into herself, that reaction didn't come from embarrassment. It came from recognition. The truth I touched wasn't new to them. It was old. Old like a bruise that never healed, right? Old like a wound that reopened every time someone even brushed near it. This wasn't about a disagreement they had last month. This went deeper, much deeper. Here's the part nobody wants to talk about: the emotional knot at the center of their father-daughter dynamic. For years, Donald depended on Ivanka not just as a political asset, but as his emotional buffer. She was the voice that softened him, the face that steadied him, the one he'd bring forward when he needed to look human. And Ivanka played that role because she believed it mattered, because she thought she could shape things from the inside. But at some point, and only those two know the exact moment, Ivanka realized that standing beside him cost her something she couldn't get back. Not money, not status, her peace, her identity. And when she finally stepped back, when she said no more, even quietly, even privately, Donald felt it as betrayal, not because she betrayed him politically, but because she removed herself from the emotional job he never admitted she was doing. That's the truth sitting underneath everything. I once worked with a man who relied on his oldest daughter in the exact same way. She handled the family issues, softened the arguments, cleaned up the emotional messes. She wasn't just a daughter, she was the glue. And the day she stepped back to save herself, he didn't get angry, he got lost. Lost in a way that turned every conversation into a minefield. That's what I saw on Trump's face the moment I referenced the tension. Not anger, not outrage, a flash of that same lost disappointment, the look of a man facing a reality he can't spin or control. And Ivanka's reaction, that wasn't guilt, that wasn't shame. It was something far more heartbreaking: exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has carried a role too heavy for too long. The exhaustion of someone who hoped if she pulled back quietly, nobody would force her to explain why. But baby, the truth always finds its way out. That's why their panic wasn't political, it was personal. The distance between them isn't strategy, it's pain. And the moment I spoke the truth aloud, I wasn't exposing a scandal. I was exposing a fracture they've been pretending not to see. A fracture. Viewers like you recognized the second it hit the air. And that brings us to the part of the story that matters most. Not what happened to them on that stage, but why you understood that moment better than they did. You know what struck me the most after that broadcast aired? It wasn't the headlines, it wasn't the political noise, it wasn't even the messages from people asking, "Jasmine, did you see Trump's face?" Or "Did you catch Ivanka's reaction?" It was the comments from seniors and from folks who've lived long enough to understand the language of silence better than any microphone ever could. People writing things like, "I know that look," or "My daughter once looked at me that way," or "That moment reminded me of something my family went through years ago." And baby, that moved me because it told me something powerful. You saw the truth on their faces because you've lived your own version of that moment. Maybe not on a stage, maybe not with cameras, maybe not in front of millions, but in kitchens, on porches, at hospital beds, in quiet living rooms after long fights, or during holidays where the smiles didn't match the mood. You recognized the tension because you felt it in your own bones. I remember sitting with an older woman in Houston a couple years back. She was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, with eyes that had watched generations rise and fall. She told me, "Jasmine, age teaches you to see what people aren't saying. That's where the truth lives." And she was right. When you're young, you look for answers in words. When you've lived long enough, you look for answers in eyes, in breath, in posture, in silence. That's why so many of you caught what Trump and Ivanka were trying to hide. You saw a father who didn't know how to reach his daughter anymore. You saw a daughter who didn't know how to carry her father's expectations without losing herself. You saw a relationship that had been papered over for years finally show its cracks. I got a message from a man in Canada who said, "My son and I had a moment like that once. I said something simple, but it was the truth and it changed everything." And another from a woman in Ohio who wrote, "I looked at Ivanka's face and saw myself at 30 trying to hold peace and break free at the same time." You saw yourselves in that moment. You weren't surprised that the truth shook them because truth shakes anybody who's been hiding from it. And maybe that's the part that hit hardest for me. The people who understood that broadcast the most weren't pundits or analysts or journalists. It was you, the people who have survived family fractures, lost closeness, fought to be heard, or chosen peace over approval. That's why I love sitting here talking with you. You don't just watch the story, but you feel it, you understand it, you know what's underneath it. And baby, if you felt the weight of that moment, wait until you hear what came next, because the emotional truth behind that live TV fracture is bigger than anything you saw on camera. You know, as I sit here talking to you tonight, replaying that moment on live television, I keep thinking about how strange it is how a single sentence can shift the entire atmosphere in a room, how a few honest words can show you everything a family has been trying to hide behind perfectly staged smiles and carefully chosen silence. The truth I spoke that night wasn't complicated, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even harsh, it was simple. But sometimes, baby, it's the simple truth that cuts the deepest, especially in families where everything fragile has been patched over instead of healed. And what happened on that stage, the look on Trump's face, the way Ivanka shrank into herself. It reminded me of something my grandmother used to say back when I was a girl sitting on her lap in that tiny Texas living room. A family's real story isn't told in what they say, it's told in how they breathe when the truth walks in. That night, I watched the truth walk in and take a seat right between the two people who've spent years pretending their relationship never wavered. And you saw it too. I know you did, because you've lived long enough to understand the difference between a disagreement and a wound. Trump wasn't angry at my words. He was startled by them. Ivanka wasn't embarrassed. She was tired. Tired in that deep soul-level way daughters get when they've carried a burden for too long. And sitting between them, I realized something that goes beyond politics, beyond headlines, beyond all the noise we drown in every day. Some families aren't breaking. They've already broken. They're just finally showing it, and that's why I appreciate you being here with me. Because this little community, the prime truth, isn't about tearing people down. It's about understanding the human truth underneath the spectacle. It's about looking past the cameras and seeing the quiet pain that lives in the corners of powerful homes. Before we go, I want to ask you something gently, honestly. Have you ever been in that moment where someone finally said the thing that had been sitting in the room for years? Did it change your family? Did it free you? Did it break you first before it healed you? Share only if you want to. Your stories matter here. And while you're down there, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this video. Not because it helps the channel, but because there are people out there who feel alone in their own family fractures. You never know who might hear something tonight that makes them feel seen. Now, before we end, let me leave you with this. If you think the moment Trump and Ivanka panicked was revealing, the story waiting on the left side of your screen right now digs even deeper into the private decisions and quiet conflicts that led to that tension long before I ever opened my mouth. Go ahead and click that video on the left. Don't let it sit there staring at you. I'm already over there waiting. And trust me, the truth we're about to uncover next cuts even closer to the bone.